Hey guys, welcome back to Billy Ray Garage. So today, we're going to be removing the headers. Now this side, driver's side, is more difficult because you have a steering wheel shaft going through the header. Passenger side, you remove a bolt, this dipstick sleeve comes out, and you could pull this out this way. So first we got to get down there, disconnect the oxygen sensors, and disconnect part of the exhaust to separate it. And I'm going to drain the oil before I do that. Let's get at it. Alright guys, just real quick. My drain plug for the GTO, the head of it got screwed up and I just basically permanently affixed a socket to it. But if you're looking to get a new one, that is the size you need. M12-1.75. And that'll fix your drain plug. Alright guys, underneath the car, got to disconnect these oxygen sensors from the back because I have to take the exhaust apart from here all the way up to the engine. So you got two more oxygen sensors right here. You're going to actually take these out. These two in the back can stay in, but you're going to drop the exhaust from that flange all the way forward. So nice and easy. I'll take this apart and we'll get to getting this header out. Alright guys. Got the part of the passenger side exhaust off and part of the driver's side exhaust off. So now we're gonna get the headers off. These are 13mm bolts. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of them. And I don't know if you can see it right there, where that black bar is right there. That's a 15mm nut that pulls off the dipstick. So let's dig into that and get this header off. Don't forget your gasket. And just like that, our header is out. Now, you want to take it out to get to the starter, and you can take the spark plugs out on this side, but there's enough room on the other side. You definitely want to take them out. So now onto the dreaded driver's side. So like I said, you got a steering shaft in there that you gotta disconnect. You gotta drop the steering column. You got to move a bunch of stuff out of the way to get this to go. It sucks, and you have to pull it out through the bottom. You cannot pull it out through the top like the other one. So yeah, let's get under here and start struggling. All right, guys, I disconnected the driver's side header because if you look down here, I'll see if I can get my finger in front of it. But there are two nuts right there. This metal bracket here, you got to take that out to get these headers out. So being that I got the header disconnected, I could get down there and I could loosen those up, and then there's two more on the inner transmission tunnel. If you were putting these headers in with the stock exhaust manifold, you would be able to get the exhaust manifold out of the way before just taking all this stuff apart, because that steering shaft does not go through the stock exhaust manifold. So I'm going to loosen those two right now, and then I'll go underneath and loosen up the other ones. Alright guys, here's the underside of the car for that bracket. So I already took these two nuts off. And I took one off here. And I just got to get the top one up here. These things are a pain in the ass. So right here. So yeah, you definitely, if you're doing long tube headers, you definitely got to take this out. And like I said, you can see in there where the steering shaft right here goes through the header, and in between, it's a pain in the ass. So you got to disconnect it so you get the header up in there. And also I recall taking the power steering rack, just unbolting it here and on the other side and pulling it out. All right, so this is that piece of shit little metal bracket that's in there, and there's three nuts there. I dropped one, but yeah, this has to come out. in order to get that header in or out. These are 13mm nuts. It's pretty easy, but it's, you gotta contort your hand in there, and then this thing pulls off. And then there's also like a wire clip, as you can see where it's kind of cleaned off here, that also gets incorporated into there. Can't really see it, but yeah, so when you put it back together, there's a little wiring harness that slips over those studs and you just nut it on. Nut it. Alright guys, now we're going to disconnect the steering rod that goes to the power steering. So if you see where my finger's pointing, there's one nut there, and then there's a metal tab that reaches around. Now the one that reaches around has a little tab that folds over. It's just a pin that goes through. So you got to bend that tab down or out of the way. Loosen that, push it out, and then we're going to loosen, well actually we're not going to loosen, we're going to take these off. There's one here, and there's one down there. I'm going to bang that out real quick. That nut is a 13mm, so I'm going to knock that out real quick, get that disconnected. And before, like I was saying, this little wiring harness thing actually has fuel line, I think. Nope, that's a brake line. I don't know what that is. But anyway, this little bracket goes onto these little studs here. So, alright, anyway, let me get this all done. Alright guys, after about an hour and a half long fight, I finally got the driver's side out. This little friggin' thing where the drive shaft goes through, fuck that thing. So let me show you what I had to do to get it out. So these two lines right here, they go into there, into the steering rack. And then you have to unbolt the steering rack from the cradle and scooch it back. And I took this off from the knuckle just to give me a little more room to play with. I don't remember it being that hard to put in, so it sucks. Let me give you a rundown on the sizes. On the front side of the steering rack, the top nut was a 16mm and the bottom was a 19. These are two different sizes, and I don't know if you could tell, the one on the left has an O-ring on it. The one on the right had no ring on it, but it just fell off. I have it, but I'm probably going to put a new one on. Make sure you don't lose those, because when I did the headers the first time, the O-ring got pinched and it was leaking. So I had to go back in there, which, oh my God, it's freaking terrible. It got pinched, so I had to replace it. And so going back in there sucks. It sucks a lot. So I think my plan, putting this thing back together, will be to put the header in and the steering column and drop the engine from there, because I am not fighting this thing again. So if you're just doing headers, good luck. But the only way out is through the bottom. You cannot get it through the top. I don't know how an 05 and 06 are, but the 04, there's no way to get it up in there. That little friggin' asshole on the driver's side header for the steering column, it will not fit through there. I don't care what you do. I took the valve cover off, it didn't do anything. So the struggle is real. Let me just show you a couple other things that are going on down here. The bolts that go through here, through the cradle, the bottom side was a 19mm, the top side nut was a 18mm. So that one's, you can't tell it's out. I mean, it's out, but it's just kind of chilling there. It pulled out a little bit. So when this engine goes back in, that header's going back in first, and just gonna have to work the engine around it, because I am not dealing with that again. I did this 15 years ago or so, and I don't remember it being that hard, but this thing fought me. I don't even know how I did it back then. I was a fucking idiot. And now I'm just a 40-year-old idiot. So keep that in mind. All right, let's try and get the starter out. And then there's a couple little odds and ends here. So like this alternator bracket right here. There's two bolts holding that on. We're gonna get that off. And then also this is a power steering hose and the wiring harness that goes to the alternator. There's a bolt underneath. We're gonna figure out what that is and get that off, because that's gonna hold this up, getting the engine out. And I believe there's one on the other side too. So yeah, we're gonna get the starter out now, and then just work on little odds and ends and get them out of the way. All right guys, onto the starter. So underneath we have two bolts that's what's holding it on. Those are 13 millimeters. And if you look up here, there's some wiring harness going through there. That is for something on the engine. There's actually a sensor. I don't know if you can see it, but it's back there. We'll get to that later. But anyway, take those two bolts off. And then you got a couple wires to disconnect up here. We'll get to that after I take this off and go from there. And two. There we go. And flop it down. Now there's also a little heat shield on this one. Let's see if I can I get that off. Yep. So there's a little heat shield on top. Save that. And let's get another view from up top. Okay, so we got two nuts to take off. We got that one and the little guy right there. So those two come off and that disconnects the starter. I'll give you the size of them in a second. That was like a little tiny itty bitty guy. Alright, we got the starter out now. Give you the sizes that I promised. So this little turd right here is an 8 millimeter and this one's a 13. That takes off the two wires that are connecting to this. And here's our heat shield that snaps on top. So it's pretty cool how this thing works, but I don't know how it does. It's witchcraft, but it does. Yeah, and this heat shield just snaps onto the top. So put that away somewhere. Don't lose it. If you're doing long tube headers and you have an old starter, I highly suggest changing the starter then, because with the long tube headers in the way, you have to disconnect them to replace the starter. Ask me how I know. So keep that in mind if you have an old starter. Let's say you have 100 and something thousand miles on your GTO and you're like, oh, I want to do long tube headers too. Like, change the starter, because that thing's going to go and it sucks with the long tube headers in. So while that side's wide open, do it. With the stock exhaust, it looked like there was a lot of room down there, so you could probably get away with it, but yeah. All right, let's go on to this alternator bracket and then the two bolts that hold that wiring harness and power steering line on, and we'll call it a video after that. All right, guys, so let's see. So there's two bolts right there, and there's one down lower. Those are 13 millimeter bolts. That holds this alternator bracket in place. So we're going to take that out real quick. It's just two bolts. Nice and easy. Try to get on there. There we go. Alright, this should benefit us now. A little shorter one. Get down to the bottom one. See if we can get on there. There we go. And free. Okay, so that's off. And just like that, we got it. Looks like everything came off together. Not too long, not too bad, not too tight. And like I said before, guys, get Ziploc bags, label it, put the parts in. So all the bolts for the alternator are here. And when we go to put it back together, it'll be a lot easier. You won't have to dig around for it. Alright guys, now we're down to the bottom of the car. As you can see, there's a wiring harness for the alternator and a bracket for the power steering line to go through. Now it goes from here to the other side of the engine. There's only two 13 millimeter bolts holding that on, so we're going to drop them, get this thing dropped down lower, and disconnect it from the engine, so when we pull it, we're not yanking on anything, and we're 99% disconnected from the car. Tiny little bolt, and then there's one more. One more right here. Let's see if we can get it. And number two. And now this whole bracket will move. It's not connected to the engine anymore. All right, now I'm going to put these two little bolts back onto the oil pan where it's connected. But first I want to show you something real quick from behind the starter. I forgot to mention this earlier. There's a sensor down here behind the starter. Say hello to my clutch. I don't know what that is. Maybe you know what it is and you can tell me what it is, but we're going to disconnect that so we don't forget about it. I don't know if that's like some sort of knock sensor or something, but either way it connects to the engine. It's off now. And also with the headers, you have to extend the wiring harness for the O2 sensors. Same thing in the back. It's there. comes up to there. So yeah, I'm back laying under the car like an idiot. So anyway, still got to disconnect the air conditioning from the engine. I'll save that for the next video because that's not a big deal. But the next big thing is getting the transmission out. Yay. So in the next video, we'll be taking out the transmission and just basically leaving the engine floating on its own so we could pull it. And yeah. So yeah, that's it for this video. Do me a favor, just subscribe. I don't even care if you like, comment. If you have questions, send them to me. I'll answer them. But yeah, see you in the next one.